Story. Portland home. Steve leaned over his daughter's shoulder. Madison's photography project was spread across their antique oak dining table, a collection of printed Instagram photos she'd taken over the past year, each capturing moments of their family life in the Pacific Northwest. "What about this one, Dad?" Madison's finger traced the edge of a photo, showing a spectacular sunset over Mount Hood. Mrs. Peterson said, "We need to demonstrate understanding of natural lighting." Steve nodded, his eyes crinkling with pride. At 13, Madison already showed remarkable talent with her camera phone, capturing moments that others might miss. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. The way you caught the sun just as it—" His voice trailed off as his thumb, scrolling through Madison's Instagram feed for more examples, froze on an image that seemed to stop time itself. The photo showed a pristine Bali beach, white sand stretching endlessly toward turquoise waters. But it wasn't the landscape that made Steve's heart stutter in his chest. It was the woman in the foreground, her dark hair catching the tropical sunlight, her familiar smile directed not at the camera, but at the man whose arms encircled her waist. Marta, his wife. The woman who, just yesterday, had sat across from him at this very table, asking for a marriage pause while she supposedly attended a wellness retreat in Sedona, Arizona. The man holding her was Jorge Salinas, the so-called business consultant who'd been spending increasingly long hours at Marta's yoga studio over the past few months. Steve had met him twice. Both times, Jorge had been impeccably dressed in designer suits that seemed at odds with the zen atmosphere of the studio, his cologne leaving a lingering trace long after he'd departed. "Is that Mom?" Madison's voice cracked slightly, her teenager's intuition already sensing something was terribly wrong. She leaned closer to the screen, her long brown hair, so like her mother's, falling forward. "But she told me she was going to Arizona. For that meditation thing?" Steve's fingers tightened around the phone, his knuckles whitening. The image was #BaliBliss and had been posted just 3 hours ago. The caption read, "Finding my authentic self in paradise. Sometimes you have to lose yourself to find yourself." Hibiscus sparkles #LiveYourTruth #wellnessjourney. His eyes caught more details with each passing second. The expensive resort cabana in the background, the matching white linen outfits Marta and Jorge wore, the intimate way Jorge's hand rested on the small of her back. The familiarity of the pose suggested this wasn't their first photo together. "Dad." Madison's voice pulled him back from the edge of his spiraling thoughts. "What's going on?" Steve quickly closed the app, but Madison's expression told him she'd already seen enough. Her brown eyes, usually sparkling with teenage mischief, now held a mix of confusion and hurt that made his chest ache. She'd already seen the romantic poses, the candlelit dinners, the sunrise yoga sessions that her mother had been sharing, apparently forgetting, or not caring that her own daughter followed her private account. "I thought—" Madison's voice wavered. "She said we'd do a family yoga retreat together next summer. She promised." Her fingers traced the edge of one of her printed photos, an image of their family at last Christmas, all three of them wearing matching holiday sweaters and genuine smiles. Steve took a deep breath, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Sometimes, sweetheart, adults make complicated choices. Your mom—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your mom is going through something right now." Madison's expression hardened in a way that reminded Steve painfully of her mother. "You mean she's lying to us?" It wasn't a question. Before Steve could respond, his phone buzzed with a notification. Another Instagram post from Marta, this time a video of her and Jorge doing paired yoga poses on the beach, their bodies moving in practice synchronization as the sun rose behind them. The caption read, "When souls align, magic happens." Woman in lotus position sparkles #twinflames #spiritual journey. Madison stood abruptly. "I'm going to my room." She gathered her photography project with trembling hands, several photos spilling onto the floor. Steve knelt to help her collect them, but she shook her head. "I've got it, Dad. I need to be alone for a bit." As Madison's footsteps faded up the stairs, Steve sank into her vacated chair, his mind replaying yesterday's conversation with Marta. The signs had been there, he realized now, the increasing distance, the late nights at the studio, the the sudden interest in spiritual awakening and conscious uncoupling podcasts. He opened his phone's gallery, scrolling back through months of family photos. Each image now held a different meaning, Marta's gradual emotional withdrawal visible in her increasingly staged smiles and distant eyes. In one photo from 2 months ago, he noticed Jorge in the background during the studio's summer solstice celebration, his gaze fixed on Marta even then. The sound of Madison's music drifted down from upstairs, the sad playlist she reserved for difficult days. Steve's finger hovered over Marta's contact information, dozens of potential messages forming and dissolving in his mind. What could he possibly say? Enjoying Sedona? How's the Arizona weather? Funny, Bali looks nothing like the Southwest. Instead, he opened his text conversation with Clarence Piper, his brother-in-law. Despite being Marta's brother, Clarence had always been closer to Steve, their shared love of craft beer and cycling forming a bond that transcended the in-law label. More importantly, Clarence's work as a private investigator might provide some clarity about exactly how long this deception had been in play. Need your help? Steve typed. Can you meet? It's about Marta. Clarence's response came almost immediately. Mulligans in 30? I might already know what this is about. Steve glanced at the stairs, considering Madison. She was responsible enough to stay home alone, but the thought of leaving her with her thoughts right now didn't sit well. He typed another message to their next-door neighbor, Mrs. Chun, who had been Madison's after-school caregiver since she was small. Emergency meeting. Could Madison hang out with you for an hour? Of course, came the swift reply. I'm making dumplings. She can help fold them. Steve walked upstairs, pausing outside Madison's door. The music had changed to something softer, but he could hear muffled sniffling beneath it. He knocked gently. Maddie? Mrs. Chan is making dumplings. Would you like to help? I need to run an errand. There was a moment of silence before Madison's voice came through the door, trying to sound stronger than it was. Is it about Mom? Yes, Steve answered honestly. They'd always had a policy of truthfulness in their family. Ironic, given current circumstances. The door opened slightly, revealing Madison's red-rimmed eyes. Are you going to try to fix it? Steve met his daughter's gaze, seeing both the child who needed protection and the young woman beginning to understand adult complexities. I'm going to figure out what's really going on. Then we'll decide what needs fixing together. Okay. Madison nodded, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. Okay, but Dad, I don't think I want to do the family yoga retreat anymore. Despite everything, Steve felt a small smile tug at his lips. No more yoga retreats. Maybe we can do a photography tour instead. That earned him a weak but genuine smile. Promise. Promise. He pulled her into a hug, feeling her thin arms wrap tightly around his waist. Now go help Mrs. Chen. She's probably going to need an expert dumpling folder. As Madison headed next door, Steve grabbed his keys and jacket. The late afternoon sun had taken on the golden quality unique to Portland autumns, but he barely noticed its beauty. His mind was already at Mulligan's, wondering what exactly Clarence meant by, might already know what this is about. He took one last look at the family photos spread across the dining table before heading out. Among them was the Christmas photo Madison had been looking at, their last holiday as a seemingly happy family. Now he wondered if even then, Marta had been planning her escape to paradise. Mulligan's was quiet for a Thursday afternoon, the usual after-work crowd not yet arrived. The Irish pub's dark wood interior and soft amber lighting created intimate spaces perfect for private conversations, which was exactly why Clarence had suggested it. Steve found his brother-in-law already seated in their usual corner booth, 2 pints of local IPA waiting on the scarred wooden table. Clarence Piper didn't look much like his sister. Where Marta was all yoga-toned elegance and carefully maintained beauty, Clarence was sturdy and practical, his detective's eye evident in the way he constantly scanned his surroundings. Right now, those observant eyes were fixed on Steve with uncomfortable knowing. You found the Bali photos, Clarence said without preamble as Steve slid into the booth. Steve's hand tightened around the cold glass of beer. You knew? Clarence took a long drink before answering, his expression grave. I've been gathering information for the past 3 weeks. Was waiting for the right time to tell you, but... He pulled out his tablet, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. I think that time is now. The previous day's conversation with Marta played through Steve's mind as Clarence worked. They'd been in their kitchen, the morning light making everything seem deceptively normal. Marta had been wearing her favorite yoga pants and one of her studio's branded hoodies, her hair pulled back in her trademark sleek ponytail. She'd been stirring her green smoothie, kale and spirulina. Steve remembered irrelevantly when she dropped her bombshell. "I need a pause," she'd said, her voice carrying that forced casualness she used when teaching beginners classes. Like Ross and Rachel in Friends. A break to explore ourselves independently. Steve had been making Madison's lunch for school, spreading almond butter on whole grain bread, crusts cut off, just the way she liked it. The knife had stilled in his hand. A pause. "It's not a big deal," Marta had continued, not meeting his eyes as she added more ice to her smoothie. The blenders had filled the uncomfortable silence. Lots of couples do this now. It's about personal growth, finding our authentic selves without the constraints of marriage, Steve had supplied, his voice remarkably steady considering how the room had seemed to tilt. Of expectations, Marta had corrected, finally looking at him with that serene expression she'd perfected over years of teaching meditation. "I've been offered a spot at this amazing wellness retreat in Sedona. 2 weeks of deep spiritual work. It's perfect timing for us to take this pause." Now, sitting in Mulligan's, Steve realized how carefully scripted that conversation had been. The casual mention of friends to normalize the idea of a break, the emphasis on wellness and spiritual growth to mask the reality of what she was planning. Clarence cleared his throat, pulling Steve back to the present. "Look at this." He turned the tablet around, revealing a spreadsheet filled with dates, locations, and financial transactions. She's been planning this for months. The Bali trip was booked 6 weeks ago through a travel agency that specializes in wellness escapes. First-class tickets, luxury resort, all arranged under her maiden name. Steve leaned forward, his eyes catching familiar numbers. "These charges, they're from our joint account?" Clarence nodded grimly. "Only the initial deposits. The bulk of the expenses are being charged to a private credit card opened 3 months ago. She's been moving money in small amounts, nothing that would trigger any alerts." "And Jorge?" Steve's voice caught slightly on the name. Clarence's expression darkened. "That's where it gets interesting." He swiped to a new screen showing a series of professional headshots. Jorge in various poses, always impeccably dressed, always wearing that same confident smile. Jorge Salinas isn't just a business consultant. He's what you might call a professional facilitator. Facilitator of transitions, Clarence explained, his detective's detachment slipping slightly as anger crept into his voice. He targets successful women, usually through wellness businesses like yoga studios or spa retreats. Positions himself as a business consultant, helps them optimize their operations, and then he trailed off meaningfully. Steve felt his stomach twist. "How many?" "That I can confirm? 7 in the past 3 years. Always the same pattern. He helps them find themselves, usually through expensive retreats and spiritual journeys. By the time the divorce papers are filed, significant assets have already been moved or spent." The pub's ambient noise seemed to fade as Steve processed this information. He thought about all the late-night consulting sessions at the studio, the way Jorge had slowly become a fixture in their social circle, always ready with business advice or spiritual insights. "The wellness retreats are his specialty," Clarence continued, pulling up more documents. "He has connections with resorts all over the world. Bali, Tulum, Santorini, places where wealthy women can find themselves while he helps them spend their husband's money." Steve's phone buzzed, another Instagram notification from Marta. He ignored it, focusing instead on the documents Clarence was showing him. Credit card statements, travel itineraries, bank transfers, all painting a picture of careful, methodical planning. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Steve asked, though he already knew the answer. Clarence met his gaze steadily. "Because I needed to be sure, and because—" He hesitated. "Because Marta's still my sister, no matter what. I hoped I was wrong, that maybe this time it was different. But when I saw today's posts—" "Madison saw them too," Steve said quietly. She was helping me with her photography project, and suddenly there was her mother, halfway around the world with a con man. Clarence finished firmly. That's what he is, Steve. A sophisticated con man who preys on women like Marta. Successful, spiritually curious, maybe a little bored with their comfortable lives. Steve took a long drink of his beer, letting the bitter hoppy taste ground him in reality. She said she needed a pause. Like Ross and Rachel. Clarence snorted. Yeah, she used that line with you too? It's one of Jorge's favorites. Makes it seem temporary, normal even. By the time the pause is over, he's usually moved on to his next target, leaving a mess of legal and financial chaos behind. How much? Steve had to clear his throat before continuing. How much has she moved? Clarence hesitated before swiping to another spreadsheet. Just over 150,000 so far. Small transfers, spread out over multiple accounts. She's been liquidating her own investments too. The studio's doing well enough to cover that. Steve thought about the joint account he and Marta had started when they first married. How they'd both faithfully deposited into it every month for 15 years. He thought about the college fund they'd been building for Madison, the retirement plans they discussed over late-night glasses of wine. I need to protect Madison, he said finally, his voice finding its strength. Whatever happens with Marta and him, I need to make sure Madison's future is secure. Clarence was already nodding. I've got some recommendations for lawyers who specialize in cases like this. But first, he pulled out his phone. There's someone else you need to talk to. Tammy's been trying to tell you something for weeks. Tammy? Steve frowned, thinking of Marta's younger sister. What does she have to do with this? She's the one who first noticed something was off with Jorge. She's seen his type before in the art world. Clarence typed quickly on his phone. She's at her gallery now. Says she can meet us in 20 minutes. Steve glanced at his own phone. Several missed calls from Marta's number now, along with a series of text messages he wasn't ready to read. Madison's at Mrs. Chin's. Text her that you'll be a bit longer, Clarence suggested. Trust me, you need to hear what Tammy has to say. As Steve sent a quick message to Mrs. Chun asking if Madison could stay for dinner, he noticed another Instagram notification. This one was a video, Marta and Jorge performing what appeared to be a couple's yoga routine on the beach. He forced himself to look away. Tammy's gallery in Portland's Pearl District. The space was quiet, closed to the public for the day, with only the soft hum of track lighting illuminating the contemporary artwork adorning the pristine walls. Steve's footsteps echoed as he followed Clarence past installations of twisted metal and canvas. Tammy emerged from her office, her artistic sensibility evident in her outfit. A paint-splattered smock over designer jeans, her dark hair twisted into a messy bun secured with what appeared to be a paintbrush. Unlike her sister's carefully maintained appearance, Tammy embraced a more authentic kind of beauty, her face free of makeup and her expression open with concern. "Steve," she said softly, pulling him into a tight hug. "I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner." The familiar scent of her lavender shampoo, so different from Marta's expensive salon products, brought an unexpected lump to his throat. Tammy had always been part of their family's inner circle, more present at Sunday dinners and school events than her own sister in recent years. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, the 7th time in the past hour. This time, he pulled it out to look. It's not cheating, we're on pause. Just like an open relationship, living my truth. Hibiscus sparkles, Marta's text read. Below it were more photos, sunset cocktails, couples massages, beachfront dinners. Each image was carefully staged, filtered to perfection, hashtagged with phrases about authenticity and spiritual awakening. She's really going all in on the spiritual journey narrative, Clarence commented, looking over Steve's shoulder. Classic Jorge playbook. Tammy led them to her office, a cozy space that felt more like a living room than a workplace. Abstract canvases leaned against walls, and a vintage leather couch invited them to sit. She closed the door behind them, her hands twisting nervously. "I need to tell you something," she began, perching on the edge of her desk. "About Jorge. About everything, really." Steve sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "How long have you known?" "I recognized him from the art world," Tammy explained. her voice tight with suppressed anger. He pulled the same routine at a gallery in Seattle last year. Called himself George Salazar then, but same man, same approach. He targeted the owner, another successful woman with a comfortable marriage and a spiritual curiosity, as he likes to call it. She moved to a filing cabinet, pulling out a folder. I've been collecting information since I first saw him at Marta's studio. The Seattle gallery nearly went bankrupt after he convinced the owner to invest in a series of transformative art retreats that turned out to be elaborate scams. Steve looked through the papers she handed him, newspaper clippings, social media screenshots, financial records. The same pattern Clarence had described, played out across different cities with different women. But that's not all I need to tell you, Tammy continued, her voice softer now. She sat beside him on the couch, close enough that he could see the faint freckles across her nose, features she shared with Madison. I've been struggling with how to say this, especially now, but with everything happening. She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I've had feelings for you for years, Steve. The way you were with Madison, how you've handled everything with Marta's episodes, her self-absorption, her constant need for validation. You deserved better than what she's done to you both. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with years of unspoken emotions. Steve felt a sudden shift in his perception of their countless shared moments, family dinners, school events, quiet conversations over coffee while Marta was busy at the studio. Tammy, he started, but she held up a hand. I'm not telling you this to complicate things. God knows they're complicated enough. She smiled sadly. I'm telling you because you need to know you have people in your corner. People who see your worth, who understand what real love and commitment look like. Clarence cleared his throat from his position by the door. And because we need to make some decisions quickly. Marta's going to burn through money fast in Bali, and once Jorge moves on. Steve's phone buzzed again. Another message from Marta, this time a video of her and Jorge participating in what appeared to be a beachfront couples ceremony, complete with flower garlands and ritual gestures. Madison, Steve said suddenly, remembering his daughter. She's still at Mrs. Chin's. I need to go, Tammy said firmly. Be with your daughter. That's one of the things I've always. She caught herself, blushing slightly. She needs you right now. We can figure out the rest tomorrow. As Steve stood to leave, Tammy caught his hand. The touch sent an unexpected current through him. Years of friendship suddenly charged with new meaning. Whatever you decide to do, she said softly, know that you're not alone in this. Either of you. The drive back to Mrs. Chin's was a blur of streetlights and scattered thoughts. His phone continued to buzz with messages from Marta, each one more defensive than the last, interspersed with new social media posts documenting her spiritual awakening. But it was Tammy's words that echoed in his mind, along with the memory of her touch. The spark between them had been genuine, born of years of friendship and mutual respect. Yet he knew timing was everything, especially with Madison's emotional well-being at stake. Mrs. Chin opened her door before he could knock, the smell of dumplings and ginger wafting out into the evening air. She's been very brave, the older woman said quietly, nodding toward her kitchen where Madison sat at the counter, methodically folding dumplings with practiced ease. But she needs her father now. Madison looked up as he entered, her hands covered in flour, her eyes red but dry. Did you figure it out? She asked simply. Steve sat beside her, picking up a dumpling wrapper and attempting to copy her precise folding technique. I'm working on it, he answered honestly. But I want you to know something. He waited until she met his eyes. Whatever happens next, we're going to face it together. And we have people who love us, really love us, in our corner. Madison nodded, returning to her dumpling folding. Like Aunt Tammy? She asked, her voice careful but knowing. Steve's hands stilled on the wrapper. How did you? Dad, Madison said, with all the wisdom of her 13 years, I'm not blind. She looks at you the way people are supposed to look at each other, not the way Mom looks at her Instagram followers. Wesley Paul's downtown Portland office, conference table where Steve sat with his improvised support team. The financial district was quiet at this hour, most buildings still dark, but Wesley had suggested meeting before regular business hours to ensure privacy. Wesley, a financial advisor who'd been handling Steve's investments since before his marriage to Marta, stood at the whiteboard, his suit jacket draped over his chair and his sleeves rolled up. The board was already covered with flowcharts and bullet points, the skeleton of their strategy taking shape in blue dry erase marker. Clarence sat to Steve's right, his detective's notebook open, different colored tabs marking various sections of evidence he'd compiled. Tammy occupied the chair to Steve's left, her gallery manager's organizational skills evident in the way she'd already created detailed spreadsheets of assets and accounts they needed to protect. First things first, Wesley said, uncapping a red marker. We need to talk about timing. Marta's pause, announcement followed by her very public trip to Bali. It actually works in our favor. He drew a timeline on the board. She's essentially documenting her own infidelity while you're still legally married. Clarence nodded, flipping through his notes. I've got timestamps on all her social media posts, credit card charges, everything. The timeline shows she was with Jorge before she ever mentioned this pause to you, which means, Tammy interjected, her voice careful but firm, she can't claim this was something that happened after a separation agreement. She's broadcasting evidence of premeditated infidelity to the whole world. Steve rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of each revelation. The conference room's climate-controlled air felt suddenly thick. Madison saw more posts this morning, he said quietly. Marta's doing some kind of couple ceremony on the beach. She's not even trying to hide it anymore. Wesley moved to his computer, pulling up financial records that displayed on the large screen mounted on the wall. That's actually perfect for us, legally speaking, but we need to move quickly. She's burning through money at an alarming rate. The screen showed a series of recent transactions, spa treatments, luxury restaurants, designer boutiques. Each charge was like a digital breadcrumb trail of Marta's new life with Jorge. How bad is it? Steve asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Wesley grimaced. In the past week alone, she's spent nearly $20,000. The charges are coming from various locations around Bali, mostly high-end resorts and retreats. Classic Jorge pattern, Clarence added, pulling out another file. He likes to keep moving his marks around different luxury locations. Makes them feel like they're on a spiritual journey instead of just burning through their savings. Tammy stood suddenly, moving to the window. The sun had risen higher now, glinting off neighboring buildings. I have a suggestion, she said, turning back to face them. My guest house. It's private, secure, and close to Madison's school. You and Madison could stay there while we sort this out. Steve felt the other's eyes on him, aware of the complex implications of Tammy's offer. The guest house was perfect from a practical standpoint, a beautiful standalone structure behind her Victorian home in a quiet neighborhood, complete with its own entrance and garden. But after Tammy's confession of her feelings, and his own emerging awareness of their connection, the suggestion carried additional weight. It makes sense, Wesley said carefully, looking between them. From a strategic standpoint, having you and Madison somewhere Marta doesn't have access to would be ideal. Especially once we start freezing accounts and initiating legal proceedings. Madison needs stability right now, Tammy added, her voice professional despite the personal undertones. She's comfortable at my place. She's been doing her photography projects in my garden for years. And it's only temporary, until we can make more permanent arrangements. Clarence cleared his throat. Steve, you need to think about Madison's emotional well-being here. Having her somewhere familiar, with people she trusts, while her world is turning upside down. He left the sentence hanging meaningfully. Steve thought about their current situation. The house full of memories that now felt tainted, the constant reminders of Marta's deception in every room. Madison had barely slept last night, her phone pinging with notifications every time her mother posted another update from her spiritual journey. Okay, he said finally. But we do this right. Everything above board, documented through proper channels. Wesley was already nodding, pulling up more documents on the screen. I'll start with the financial separation first. We'll freeze the joint credit cards and transfer your portion of the assets to new, secure accounts. Marta's spending spree ends today. I've got a friend at the courthouse, Clarence added, making notes. We can file the initial paperwork this afternoon. Get everything on record before she tries to spin this her way. Tammy moved back to the table, her expression carefully neutral despite the relief evident in her posture. I'll have the guest house ready by tonight. Madison can help set up the space however she wants. Make it feel like her own. Steve looked at the three people who had become his lifeline in this crisis. Each brought their own expertise, their own way of helping him navigate what could have been a devastating blow. But it was Tammy's quiet strength, her genuine concern for Madison's well-being, that touched him most deeply. There's something else, Wesley said, pulling up another document. We need to talk about the yoga studio. Marta's business is technically separate from your joint assets, but given Jorge's involvement, we document everything, Clarence interrupted firmly. Every consulting session, every unusual transaction. Jorge's pattern is to use these wellness businesses as his hunting ground. The more evidence we have of his real operation, the stronger our case. Tammy's hand found Steve's under the table, a brief, supportive squeeze that spoke volumes. He noticed Wesley and Clarence exchange a quick glance, but appreciated that neither commented. Madison's spring break starts next week, Steve remembered suddenly. We were supposed to. He trailed off, remembering the family yoga retreat Marta had been planning, or pretending to plan. Photography tour, Tammy suggested quietly. The Japanese garden is beautiful this time of year. She's been wanting to work on her nature photography. The simplicity of the suggestion, its perfect alignment with Madison's actual interests rather than Marta's imposed activities, brought a lump to Steve's throat. This was what real support looked like. Understanding what his daughter needed, not just what looked good on social media. Wesley clapped his hands together. Right, let's get to work. Steve, I need you to sign some documents. Clarence, start the legal wheels turning. Tammy. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Get the guest house ready. Madison's going to need a safe space to process all this. As they divided up tasks and responsibilities, Steve felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. His marriage was ending, his life was in upheaval, but somehow, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about him and Madison, the future didn't look as dark as it had yesterday. One more thing, Clarence said as they prepared to leave. Marta's going to figure this out soon. When she does. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew her tendency for dramatic gestures and public scenes. We'll be ready, Tammy said firmly. All of us. The sun was fully up now, Portland coming alive outside the office windows. Steve took a deep breath, straightening his shoulders. It was time to move forward, one careful step at a time. The next few days passed in a carefully orchestrated dance of legal maneuvers and practical arrangements. Steve stood in Madison's bedroom, watching as his daughter methodically sorted through her belongings, deciding what to take to Tammy's guest house. Unlike most teenagers faced with packing, Madison approached the task with an almost surgical precision. Dad, she called from her closet, should I pack my meditation cushion? The question carried a weight beyond its simple words. The cushion had been a birthday gift from Marta, part of her constant attempts to draw Madison into her wellness world. Only if you want to use it for something else, Steve answered carefully. Maybe as a photography prop? Madison emerged from the closet, holding the embroidered cushion. After a moment's consideration, she placed it deliberately in the donate pile. I think I'm done with meditation for a while. While Madison worked, Steve's phone buzzed with updates from their support team. Wesley had successfully frozen the joint credit cards and transferred Steve's assets to new, secure accounts. The confirmation email showed the exact moment Marta's latest attempt to charge a luxury spa treatment had been declined. Mom's going to freak, Madison said matter-of-factly, carefully wrapping her camera in a soft cloth. I saw her other posts, Dad. The ones she thought I was blocked from. She's been planning this for a while. Steve moved to help her pack her photography equipment, noting how she'd already arranged everything in order of importance. What do you mean, blocked from? Madison's hands stilled on her favorite lens. She has different Instagram accounts. The public one for her yoga stuff, the private one she thinks I don't know about. She's been posting about new beginnings and breaking free for months. She looked up at her father, her eyes too old for her 13 years. Jorge's been commenting on them since last summer. The revelation sent a chill through Steve. He made a mental note to tell Clarence about the second account, More evidence of premeditation? How did you find the other account? She's not very creative with passwords, Madison shrugged. And she used the same ones for both accounts. Plus, she added with a hint of teenage exasperation, she keeps using the same filters and hashtags. It wasn't exactly CSI-level detective work. A knock at the door interrupted them. Clarence stood in the doorway, his expression grim but satisfied. "We've got something," he said to Steve. "You're going to want to see this." In the hallway, safely out of Madison's earshot, Clarence pulled out his tablet. "Jorge isn't just running a simple con," he explained, pulling up documents. "He's got a whole network. We found 5 other wellness consultants operating the same scheme in different cities. They target successful women, usually with established businesses in the wellness sector. Then they orchestrate these spiritual awakenings that always end in expensive divorces." Steve leaned against the wall, processing this information. "How many women?" "That we can confirm? At least 20 in the past 2 years. They're careful. They operate just inside the law. Everything's documented as business consulting or spiritual guidance. But the pattern's clear. They identify wealthy targets, integrate themselves into their businesses, and then they convince them to blow up their lives," Steve finished. Clarence nodded grimly. "The good news is, we've got proof that Jorge's been working this angle for years. The bad news? He's good at covering his tracks. Most of his victims are too embarrassed to come forward." From Madison's room came the sound of her favorite playlist, the one she used when she needed to focus. Steve could picture her methodically packing her life into boxes, sorting through the pieces of her childhood with the same attention to detail she brought to her photography. "There's more," Clarence continued, lowering his voice further. "We found evidence that Marta and Jorge have been in contact for over a year. Long before he ever showed up at the studio, he'd been grooming her through wellness conferences and spiritual retreats." Steve thought back to the past year, the increasing number of weekend retreats, the wellness conferences that seemed to multiply on Marta's calendar. She said they were for professional development, he remembered. Building her brand. "They were building something, all right," Clarence said darkly. "We found hotel reservations, restaurant charges, all carefully disguised as business expenses. Jorge even created fake wellness certification programs to justify their meetings." The sound of Madison's music changed to something softer, more melancholic. Steve checked his watch. They were expected at Tammy's in 2 hours to start moving in their essential items. "Does Tammy know about all this?" he asked. Clarence's expression softened slightly. "She's been helping with the investigation. Her contacts in the art world have been invaluable. Turns out Jorge tried similar schemes in several galleries before focusing on yoga studios." The mention of Tammy brought a complex mix of emotions. Her guest house offer had been a lifeline, but Steve was acutely aware of the need to handle their evolving relationship carefully, especially for Madison's sake. "Dad," Madison called from her room. "I'm ready for the boxes." They spent the next hour carefully packing Madison's chosen belongings into labeled boxes. She'd organized everything with precision: essential items, photography equipment, school supplies, and a carefully curated selection of personal mementos. "What about the family albums?" she asked, pointing to the bookshelf where years of professionally photographed family moments sat in matching leather albums. Steve looked at the albums, each one a carefully staged representation of what Marta had wanted their family to appear to be. "Why don't we start fresh?" he suggested. "Make new albums with your photos?" Madison's smile was small but genuine. "Real ones this time? Not just pose stuff?" "Absolutely real," Steve promised. "Every messy, imperfect moment." As they loaded the last box into Steve's car, his phone buzzed with a notification. Marta had posted another update. "Finding my authentic self means letting go of artificial constraints. Some will call it selfish, but true enlightenment requires radical honesty. Hashtag live your truth, hashtag no regret." Madison, reading over his shoulder, made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "That's the same caption she used last month, just with different hashtags." Steve turned off his phone, focusing instead on his daughter's resilience. "Ready for the next chapter?" Madison squared her shoulders, adjusting her camera back. "Just don't expect me to do any sunrise yoga poses for your Instagram, okay?" The drive to Tammy's house was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. As they turned onto her tree-lined street, Steve caught sight of Tammy in her garden, already preparing the guest house for their arrival. The setting sun caught her hair as she worked, creating a halo effect that made Madison reach instinctively for her camera. "The light's perfect," she murmured, snapping a quick photo through the car window. Steve glanced at his daughter, recognizing the artistic focus she'd inherited from her aunt rather than her mother. "Want to do a proper photo session in the garden later?" Madison lowered her camera, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Maybe, but not for posting anywhere. Just for us." As they pulled into Tammy's driveway, Steve felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This wasn't the end he'd expected for his marriage, but watching Madison already planning photo compositions in the garden, he realized it might be the beginning of something more authentic than anything Marta's wellness journey could offer. The guest house settled into a rhythm of new normalcy over the next few weeks. Morning light filtered through the garden's cherry trees, creating patterns on the breakfast nook's wooden table where Steve sat with his first coffee of the day. The space, initially meant to be temporary, had begun to feel like home in ways their previous house never had. Madison had transformed one corner of her room into a photography studio, complete with a simple backdrop and lighting setup Tammy had helped her arrange. Her recent photos, carefully printed and unfiltered, lined the walls, real moments captured with an artist's eye. The sound of the garden gate opening drew Steve's attention. Tammy appeared, carrying a basket of fresh pastries from their favorite local bakery. These morning deliveries had become a quiet tradition, a simple act of care that spoke volumes. "Madison up yet?" she asked, setting the basket on the table. The morning sun caught the silver streaks in her dark hair, the ones she never bothered to color, unlike her sister's carefully maintained perfection. "She's editing photos from yesterday's shoot," Steve replied, pouring her a coffee just the way she liked it, black with a hint of cinnamon. "She's really proud of the series she took at her soccer game." "She should be," Tammy said, settling into what had become her usual chair. "She's developing a real eye for candid moments." Their quiet morning ritual was interrupted by Steve's phone buzzing with an update from Wesley. The screen displayed a series of denied credit card transactions from Bali, each attempt getting progressively more expensive. "Marta's not taking the financial freeze well," Steve noted, showing Tammy the list. "She's tried to access 3 different resort spas in the last hour alone." Tammy studied the transactions, her gallery owner's eye for detail catching patterns. "She's moving around the island. These charges are from different areas. Jorge's probably keeping her on the move to avoid questions from the resorts." The sound of footsteps on the guest house stairs announced Madison's arrival. She appeared in the doorway, her camera already in hand. Without speaking, she raised the camera, capturing the moment, her father and aunt sharing coffee in the soft morning light, pastries untouched between them. "The composition's perfect," she said, reviewing the shot. "No filters needed." Tammy smiled, pushing the basket of pastries toward her. "Speaking of composition, how's the soccer game series coming along?" Madison selected a croissant, her expression brightening. "I got some great action shots, but my favorites are the candid ones, when people don't know they're being photographed. They're just real. Like this one," she added, showing them her most recent shot on her camera's display. The image of Steve and Tammy sharing their morning coffee captured something intangible, a comfortable silence, a shared moment of peace. Steve felt a familiar warmth in his chest, watching his daughter and Tammy discuss photography techniques. This was what family should feel like: natural, unposed, genuine. No carefully curated social media presence, no forced spiritual awakenings, just real connections growing organically. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Clarence. "Got more evidence," the text read. "Jorge's pattern is clearer than ever. Also, heads up, Marta's starting to figure out she's been cut off." As if on cue, Steve's phone lit up with a series of increasingly frantic messages from Marta. "Why isn't my card working? What have you done? You can't do this. We're on pause, not divorced. I need access to my money." Madison glanced at the messages over his shoulder, her expression hardening. She still doesn't get it, does she? That a pause doesn't mean she gets to spend all our money while posting about her spiritual journey with Jorge. Tammy reached across the table, her hand finding Madison's. Sometimes people get so caught up in their own narrative that they lose sight of how their actions affect others. Steve watched their interaction, noting how naturally Tammy offered support without trying to replace Marta's role. She'd been doing that since they moved in, being present, supportive, but never pushing. "Your soccer game is next week, right?" Tammy asked Madison, skillfully changing the subject. "The afternoon light at the field should be perfect for action shots." Madison nodded, already reaching for her camera to adjust settings. "Coach says I can photograph the whole game if I play the first half. I want to capture everyone's real reactions. Not just the winning moments, but the whole experience. That's what makes a true story," Steve found himself saying. "All the moments, not just the ones that look good on Instagram." Tammy caught his eye across the table, a look of understanding passing between them. They both knew that healing would take time, that Madison's pain couldn't be filtered away like one of Marta's wellness posts. "We should do this right," Tammy said softly, her words weighted with multiple meanings. "No secrets, no shame. When Marta returns, she needs to know that real love doesn't need a pause." The morning light shifted, creating new patterns on the breakfast table. Madison raised her camera again, capturing another candid moment. In the background, Steve's phone continued to buzz with Marta's messages, but here in the guest house kitchen, surrounded by fresh pastries and honest conversation, those desperate texts seemed to come from another world entirely. "Dad." Madison lowered her camera, her expression serious. "I'm glad we're here. Not just in the guest house, but here, with Aunt Tammy. It feels real." Steve finished, understanding completely. Outside, Portland was coming alive with morning activity. They could see the cherry blossoms beginning to fall, nature's reminder that endings often herald new beginnings. But for now, in this moment, they simply sat together, sharing pastries and genuine smiles. No documentation required beyond Madison's thoughtful photographs. The comfortable silence was interrupted by one final message from Clarence. "Everything's in place. She can't touch the accounts. You're protected. All of you." Steve looked at his daughter, engrossed in showing Tammy her latest photographs, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Sometimes protection came not just in frozen bank accounts and legal documents, but in quiet morning coffees and unfiltered moments shared with people who truly cared. "So," Tammy said, reaching for another pastry, "about that soccer game, I was thinking we could set up multiple angles for photography. Really capture the whole story." As Madison launched into an excited discussion of camera positions and lighting angles, Steve realized that while Marta was off finding herself in Bali, they had already found something more valuable: authenticity in their daily moments, strength in their quiet support of each other, and healing in their shared laughter over morning pastries. The guest house was no longer just a temporary shelter from the storm of Marta's betrayal. It had become something else entirely, a place where real stories could unfold, unfiltered and honest, one candid photograph at a time. The Bali sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, but Marta McCoy barely noticed its beauty as she stared at her declined credit card on the spa resort's polished counter. The young receptionist's apologetic expression only fueled her growing panic. "I'm so sorry, Ms. McCoy, but this card has been declined as well." The receptionist's accent was impeccable, her manner professional despite this being the third card Marta had presented. "Perhaps you'd like to try another form of payment." Jorge lounged on a nearby settee, his carefully cultivated spiritual advisor demeanor showing its first cracks of concern. His phone buzzed repeatedly, but he kept silencing it, his usual serene expression tightening around the edges. "This is impossible," Marta insisted, her wellness guru facade cracking. "These are premium cards. There must be some mistake." She dug through her designer handbag, past crystals and meditation beads, searching for another card. "Try this one." The receptionist's fingers moved gracefully across the keyboard, but the result was the same. "I apologize, but this one appears to be frozen as well." Marta's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, clicking through her banking apps. Each attempt to access their joint accounts was met with error messages. Her private accounts, the ones she'd been slowly building up over the past year, showed zero balances. "Jorge." She turned to him, expecting the calm guidance he'd been offering since they'd met. What's happening? But Jorge's attention was fixed on his phone, his thumb scrolling rapidly through what appeared to be flight schedules. A text notification caught Marta's eye. Something about a next client and Singapore timing. Just a minor setback, darling, he said. But his tone lacked its usual conviction. Mercury is in retrograde, after all. Perhaps the universe is suggesting we need to adjust our journey. The resort manager appeared, his presence adding to Marta's mounting humiliation. Ms. McCoy, Mr. Salinas, I'm afraid we need to discuss your outstanding balance. We've been more than accommodating, but without valid payment. Marta retreated to their luxury suite. The room was a testament to 2 weeks of unlimited spending, designer resort wear draped over chairs, room service trays bearing half-eaten organic delicacies, crystal healing sets scattered across meditation cushions. Her phone lit up with another Instagram notification. One of her recent posts, a sunrise yoga pose with Jorge on the beach, had attracted hundreds of comments, but not the usual supportive ones from her wellness community. These were different. How could you do this to Steve and Madison? What happened to the Arizona retreat story? Unfollowing. Can't support this kind of deception. Panic rising, Marta scrolled through her feed. Her carefully curated image was unraveling in real time. Former yoga students were unfollowing in droves. The wellness journey hashtags she'd been using were now filled with comments questioning her authenticity. She tried calling Steve again, the 20th attempt that day, but it went straight to voicemail. Her text messages showed as delivered but unread. Steve, please. Let's talk about this. You can't just cut me off. What about my spiritual journey? This isn't fair. The suite's bathroom door opened, and Jorge emerged, fully dressed in his signature designer spiritual wear. His usual stack of meditation beads was noticeably absent. Marta, darling, he began, his tone practiced but hurried. I've just received an urgent call. A spiritual emergency with another client in Singapore. You understand, don't you? These karmic interventions can't be scheduled. Marta stared at him, her world tilting on its axis. You're leaving? Now? But what about our soul connection? The twin flame journey? Jorge was already moving through the suite, gathering his belongings with practiced efficiency. Sometimes twin flames must burn separately to grow stronger. It's all part of the spiritual dance, yes? But Marta's voice cracked. What about the resort bill? Our plans for the wellness retreat franchise? Trust in the universe's plan, Jorge offered, checking his luxury watch, the one Marta had bought him last week. Your path is your own now. Very empowering, really. Before Marta could process what was happening, Jorge was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of his signature sandalwood cologne and a suite full of unpaid bills. Desperate, she opened her laptop, trying to access the yoga studio's accounts. Error messages greeted her there too. Even her professional Instagram account was flooded with unfollows and questioning comments from her once loyal wellness community. A final blow came in the form of an email from her studio manager. In light of recent events and documented irregularities in the consulting contracts, the studio board has voted to suspend your position pending investigation. Marta sank onto a meditation cushion, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. She could see the same beach where she'd posed for countless authentic photos with Jorge, each one now a digital testament to her deception. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification about a credit card chargeback for her earlier spiritual guidance sessions with Jorge. The universe, it seemed, was not accepting her preferred method of payment. With trembling fingers, she booked the first available flight back to Portland, using the last of her airline miles. As she packed her designer resort wear and crystal collections, her phone continued to fill with notifications, each one a digital nail in the coffin of her carefully curated life. The resort manager's knock came just as she was zipping her suitcase. Ms. McCoy? About the outstanding balance. Portland's familiar rain greeted Marta as she emerged from the airport, a sharp contrast to Bali's tropical warmth. Her designer luggage, once a symbol of her spiritual journey, now felt like anchors of shame as she wheeled them through the terminal. The house key stuck in the lock, her first sign that something was wrong. When it finally turned, she stepped into an emptiness that took her breath away. The space that had once been filled with family photos and Madison's artwork now echoed with absence. On the kitchen counter, where she'd stirred her last green smoothie before leaving for Arizona, sat a thick envelope. Inside, she found divorce papers, meticulously documented evidence of her affair with Jorge, and a handwritten note that cut deeper than any legal document. Pause this. Her phone, which had been mercifully silent during the flight, exploded with notifications as it reconnected to Wi-Fi. Messages from mutual friends carried the same theme. They knew everything. Her attempt to maintain the Arizona retreat story had backfired spectacularly. Sarah Chun, their longtime neighbor, appeared at the back door, watering can in hand. Her expression shifted from surprise to carefully controlled disapproval. "Oh, you're back." Sarah, Marta attempted her yoga teacher's serene smile. "Yes, the Arizona retreat was." "Save it." Sarah cut her off. "We all saw the Bali posts. Madison's been at my house, crying, looking at them." "How could you, Marta?" The mention of Madison shattered what remained of Marta's composure. "Madison? Where is she? Where's my daughter?" "With people who put her first," Sarah replied, turning away. "And before you ask, yes, everyone at the studio knows too. Your business consultant has quite a reputation in the wellness community." Alone in the empty house, Marta opened her laptop, desperate to salvage what she could of her reputation. Her professional social media accounts told the story, former clients sharing their own experiences with Jorge, connecting the dots between his various consulting gigs across the country. A text from her studio manager confirmed her worst fears. "Board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Your presence is required to discuss the financial irregularities in the consulting contracts." Through mutual friends' social media posts, Marta learned that Steve and Madison were living with Tammy. The revelation that they were staying with her sister sent her rushing to the bathroom, where she dry-heaved over the toilet. Her phone buzzed with a message from Clarence, the first contact from her family since her return. "Board meeting tomorrow. Bring your lawyer. We have questions about those wellness retreat investments." Marta sank onto the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of her unraveling life. Her phone continued to buzz with notifications, each one adding to the mounting evidence against her. Former clients. "Can't believe we fell for the conscious uncoupling workshops." Yoga students. "So much for authentic living." Wellness community peers. "Jorge Salinas strikes again." Hashtag wellness scam. As the sun set outside her empty house, Marta scrolled through Madison's photography Instagram account. Her daughter had been documenting life without her. Soccer games, garden photos, family dinners. Real moments, unfiltered and genuine, featuring Steve and Tammy's natural interactions with Madison. The stark contrast between these authentic captures and her own staged Bali photos struck her like a physical blow. While she'd been posting about finding herself in paradise, her daughter had been finding strength in the truth. The Japanese garden in Portland had never looked more beautiful than it did on this autumn morning, 6 months after Marta's return from Bali. The maples were turning crimson and gold, their leaves dancing in the gentle breeze as guests gathered for Steve and Tammy's wedding. Madison, now 14, moved through the crowd with her camera, capturing candid moments with an artist's eye. Her recent photography exhibition at Tammy's Gallery, a series titled Real Moments, had sold out completely, the proceeds starting her college fund. The ceremony location had been Madison's idea. She'd spent countless hours here with Tammy over the years, learning to capture light and shadow while her mother had been busy building her wellness empire. Now, the garden's natural beauty provided the perfect backdrop for a celebration of authentic love. The wedding invitation had caused quite a stir in Portland's social circles. Its postscript, "No pause needed, just press play," had become something of a local catchphrase, a gentle rebellion against the manufactured spirituality that had nearly torn their family apart. Steve stood near the koi pond, adjusting his tie. The past 6 months had been a journey of their own, dealing with the divorce proceedings, helping Madison heal, building a new kind of family. But unlike Marta's spiritual journey, theirs had been rooted in reality, in daily acts of love and support. Tammy emerged from the garden's tea house, where she'd been getting ready. She'd chosen a simple dress that echoed her gallery owner aesthetic, elegant but unpretentious. No designer labels, no carefully curated image, just authentic beauty. Madison lowered her camera for a moment, watching her father see Tammy for the first time in her wedding dress. The way they looked at each other, that was the kind of moment she learned to capture. Real emotion, no filters needed. The ceremony itself was everything Marta's carefully staged life had not been. Clarence, serving as best man, had tears in his eyes as he handed over the rings. Madison, taking a break from her photography duties to serve as maid of honor, spoke about the difference between posed happiness and real joy. When I was younger, she told the gathered guests, I thought love was like Mom's Instagram feed, perfectly filtered, carefully arranged, always camera ready. But real love, the kind I see between my dad and Tammy, doesn't need validation from social media. It shows up in morning coffees and soccer game cheers, in quiet support and honest conversations. As Steve and Tammy exchanged vows, their words were simple but profound. No elaborate promises of spiritual awakening, no carefully crafted hashtags, just honest commitments to love and support each other, to be there for Madison, to build a life based on truth rather than appearances. The reception flowed naturally into the garden spaces. Guests moved between the maple trees and stone lanterns, enjoying local food and wine. Madison continued her photography, capturing genuine laughter, tearful hugs, unguarded moments of celebration. News of Marta's wellness journey's aftermath had spread through Portland's social circles. Her yoga studio had been sold to a collective of authentic instructors. Jorge had vanished to Southeast Asia, reportedly pursuing new, spiritual consulting opportunities. But here in the Japanese garden, those stories felt like distant echoes. Steve watched his new wife chatting with guests, her gallery owner's knowledge of art and culture adding depth to discussions about the garden's design. No one was checking their phones for social media updates or staging poses for Instagram. The joy was real, unfiltered, and needed no digital validation. Madison joined them by the koi pond, her camera temporarily at rest. I got some amazing shots, she said, her voice full of quiet pride. Especially of you two when you thought no one was watching. Tammy wrapped an arm around her stepdaughter. Those are always the best moments, aren't they? The real ones. Japanese maples, guests gathered for one final celebration. Madison raised her camera one last time, capturing the scene. Her father and Tammy, surrounded by people who loved them, their happiness genuine and unscripted. The garden's stone lanterns began to glow as evening approached, their soft light illuminating paths between the maples. Steve held Tammy close as they watched Madison photograph the gathering dusk. Their journey hadn't been perfect. Real ones never are. But it had led them here, to this moment of authentic joy. In the end, Marta's marriage pause had indeed changed everything, just not in the way she'd intended. While she'd been seeking enlightenment in carefully staged photos, real love had been growing in quiet moments and honest conversations, in soccer games and morning coffees, in the simple truth of being present for each other. The wedding party lingered in the garden as stars began to appear above the maples. Madison's camera captured it all, the natural progression of evening, the genuine interactions, the unfiltered joy of a family that had found its way not through careful curation, but through honest love and support. Epilogue. 10 years later, full circle. A gentle autumn breeze rustled through the Japanese garden's maples, their leaves painted in the same vibrant reds and golds that had graced Steve and Tammy's wedding day a decade ago. Madison Weeks Rogers, now 23 and a renowned documentary photographer, adjusted her camera settings as she prepared to capture a different kind of milestone. The launch of her groundbreaking book, The Wellness Wolves, a photographic exposé. The garden's pavilion had been transformed into an intimate event space, where journalists, photographers, and victims of wellness industry scams gathered to share their stories. Large prints from Madison's decade-long documentation project lined the walls, each telling a part of the larger narrative that had begun with her own family's story. The idea came from watching my mother's Instagram feed, Madison explained to the assembled crowd, her confidence evident in her steady voice. It started as a teenage girl's confusion over her mom's spiritual journey, but evolved into something much bigger. These images tell the stories of dozens of families affected by wellness industry predators. Steve sat in the front row, his hand entwined with Tammy's, their 8-year-old daughter Claire beside them. Now an accomplished family therapist specializing in helping families recover from similar situations, Steve had contributed a chapter to Madison's book about the psychological impact of wellness fraud on children and spouses. The exhibition portion of the launch featured a timeline of Marta and Jorge's story, but it was just one thread in a larger tapestry of deception and consequences. Through Madison's lens, the aftermath of their spiritual journey had unfolded in unexpected ways. Marta McCoy's path had spiraled downward in stages. After her failed attempt to rebuild in Seattle, she drifted between smaller cities, each time trying to reinvent herself in the wellness space. Her last known venture, a mindful living consultancy in Tucson, had folded when former clients from Portland recognized her and shared their stories online. She still sends Christmas cards, Madison told a journalist who asked about current contact, always with quotes about forgiveness and spiritual growth. Last year's had a vision board for her newest venture, something about authentic desert healing. But the return address was a P.O. box, and the photos were all stock images. Jorge Salinas' fate had been more dramatic. His Singapore operation had unraveled spectacularly when he'd attempted to scam the wealthy widow of a tech entrepreneur. Unknown to him, she'd been working with Clarence's international fraud investigation team. The sting operation had exposed a network of wellness industry predators operating across 3 continents. Jorge's currently serving 8 years in a Singapore prison, Clarence explained to the audience during his presentation segment. But he's just one player in a larger game. Our agency has identified over 30 similar operators using wellness and spiritual awakening as covers for sophisticated fraud schemes. Clarence's work had evolved far beyond his original private investigation business. The Piper Agency now specialized in exposing wellness industry fraud, with offices in Portland, Singapore, and London. His wall in the exhibition showed the statistics. Over $50 million in recovered assets, dozens of predators exposed, hundreds of families helped. The interesting thing about these cases, Clarence continued, displaying a series of Madison's photos showing different wellness scammers in action, is how the same patterns repeat. They always target successful women during periods of personal questioning. They use the language of spiritual awakening to justify financial exploitation. And they always document everything on social media. The exhibition included a haunting series of images showing the aftermath of these schemes. Empty yoga studios with motivational quotes still stenciled on the walls. Abandoned retreat centers with meditation cushions gathering dust. Credit card statements showing the swift drainage of life savings into spiritual investment opportunities. But the heart of the exhibition was the recovery stories. Madison's camera had captured the moment when a woman in Singapore recognized Jorge from Clarence's alert system and called authorities instead of falling for his conscious investment pitch. She documented support group meetings where families shared their healing journeys. Her lens had frozen moments of genuine spiritual growth emerging from the ashes of artificial enlightenment. A separate section celebrated the positive transformations that had emerged from their family's crisis. Steve's therapy practice had helped dozens of families rebuild trust after similar betrayals. Tammy's gallery had become a leading venue for documentary photography exposing social issues, with Madison's work as its cornerstone. Claire, proudly wearing a junior photographer badge, moved through the crowd with her own camera, capturing candid moments just as her big sister had taught her. Her natural eye for authentic moments proved that some gifts skip a generation. She had inherited none of Marta's need for artificial perfection. The real spiritual journey, Steve told a group of therapy colleagues attending the launch, happened after the deception. Watching Madison transform her pain into purpose, seeing families heal through honesty rather than hashtags, that's genuine enlightenment. The exhibition included a wall dedicated to the warning signs, featuring paired images, staged wellness posts next to the harsh realities they concealed. Madison's artistic eye had captured the subtle tells. The two perfect poses, the calculated vulnerability, the carefully curated, authentic moments. It's not about demonizing the wellness industry, Madison explained during her keynote speech. It's about recognizing the difference between genuine healing and predatory exploitation. Real wellness professionals don't need to manufacture authenticity. They live it. As if to underscore this point, The exhibition included profiles of legitimate wellness practitioners who had helped expose fraudulent operators. Their stories, captured through Madison's lens, showed how authentic healing work contrasted sharply with the performative spirituality of predators like Jorge. The most powerful images came from Madison's documentation of the international investigation that finally brought Jorge to justice. Her camera had been present when Singapore authorities arrested him at a luxury resort where he'd been preparing to launch Conscious Wealth Mastery Retreat. The photos showed his mask of spiritual serenity crumbling as he realized his next client was wearing a wire. The hardest part to capture, Madison told a photography student who asked about technique, wasn't the arrest itself. It was the moment just before, when you could see in his eyes that he knew the performance was over. That's when the real person emerged from behind the spiritual advisor facade. A quiet corner of the exhibition was reserved for something more personal, recent attempts at contact from Marta. Letters, emails, and social media messages showed her continued inability to distinguish between authentic connection and performed enlightenment. Dearest Madison, I'm launching a new healing modality combining desert wisdom with digital entrepreneurship. Would love your social media expertise. #authenticity coach, #spiritual mother. Steve, I've had profound insights about our journey. Let me share them in my new wellness podcast. Your story could inspire others on their conscious uncoupling path. Tammy, sister, surely enough time has passed for spiritual reconciliation? My new retreat center has a family healing program. Each message remained unanswered, each plea for social media validation met with silence. The family had learned that sometimes the most authentic response is no response at all. As evening approached, the launch event shifted to a more intimate gathering. Close friends and family members who had supported them through the past decade shared memories and celebrated the triumph of truth over carefully curated deception. Mrs. Chun, now in her 70s but still making the world's best dumplings, had brought a feast. Real nourishment, she said firmly, setting out plates, doesn't need designer packaging or spiritual branding. Wesley Paul, who had helped protect their assets during the crisis, raised a toast to financial literacy and authentic investment. His firm now offered special services for families recovering from wellness industry fraud, turning Marta's deception into a force for positive change. Sarah, who had married Clarence 2 years after their investigation partnership turned romantic, shared stories about their international fraud-busting adventures. Their twins, age 5, played with Claire, all 3 children growing up with a healthy skepticism about too perfect social media posts. As the sun set over the Japanese garden, Madison gathered everyone for a group photo. Unlike the staged portraits of her childhood, this one captured genuine joy, slightly blurred edges, authentic laughter, imperfect but real. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the exhibition lights dimmed, Madison sat alone in the garden where everything had changed a decade ago. Her camera rested in her lap as she opened one final email that had arrived during the launch. Dear Ms. Weeks Rogers, greetings from Changi Prison, Singapore. Jorge Salinas has requested an interview for his upcoming book, Conscious Capitalism, A Spiritual Entrepreneur's Journey. Would you be interested in providing photos? Best regards. His literary agent. Madison smiled, picked up her camera, and began composing her response through images. A bank statement showing his victims' lost savings. A support group meeting for families he'd destroyed. The moment of his arrest, mask finally falling. Her mother's last known address, a small apartment above a strip mall yoga studio in Tucson. She titled the series The Only Pictures You Need and hit send. Standing to leave, Madison caught her reflection in the garden's koi pond. Her camera, like always, hung ready at her side, but she didn't need to capture this moment. Some truths were best held in memory. How a family's greatest crisis had birthed its greatest strength, how authentic love had triumphed over artificial enlightenment, and how the simple act of honest documentation had helped heal not just her family, but countless others. Above her, the stars emerged one by one, no filters required. Somewhere in Tucson, perhaps Marta was planning her next reinvention. Somewhere in Singapore, Jorge was plotting his post-prison comeback. But here in Portland, in the garden where real love had blossomed from artificial crisis, Madison knew that the most powerful journey wasn't about finding yourself. It was about being true to who you already were. She raised her camera one last time, capturing the garden in starlight. The image would join the others in her archive, telling a story that began with deception but ended in truth. Not a perfect ending, not a carefully curated spiritual awakening, but something far more valuable. A real family, built on genuine love, documented with unflinching honesty. Tomorrow would bring new stories to capture, new frauds to expose, new truths to tell. But tonight, in the quiet garden where her family's healing began, Madison simply sat with her camera and smiled, knowing that sometimes the best spiritual journey is the one that leads you home to yourself. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.